Is the standoff between Gary Lineker and the BBC about to come to an end?
Have you come to any sort of agreement with the BBC yet, Mr. Lineker?
Can't say anything at the moment, sorry. I'm going to do my...
The presenter, who remains suspended over his comments about government policy, was tight-lipped earlier today, but as reported tonight, talks are moving in the right direction. Also ahead, Rishi Sunak arrives in the US for talks with President Biden and Australia's PM. On the agenda, dealing with any threat posed by China. Plus,
and Wade, it goes low, and James Law gets it down. Try Ireland.
in Six Nations Rugby, Ireland beat Scotland and stay on course for a Grand Slam. And
I'm not going anywhere until Mum's done every single ref.
The barista from Belfast, now a front-runner at this year's Oscars.
Never trust a big bias cover, because we're all human beings here. We know how to act.
This is ITV News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. It's been an extraordinary few days at the BBC and for its highest paid star, Gary Lineker, who was suspended over his controversial tweet about the government's asylum policy. And tonight there are indications a standoff between him and his employers could soon be over. The BBC is reporting talks between the two sides are moving in the right direction after football programmes were scaled back for a second day, including tonight's Match of the Day 2. But as Sejal Carrier reports, Gary Lineker was today tight-lipped about his future and any talks with his bosses.
Have you spoken to Tim Davey yet, Mr. Lineker?
I'm going to walk my dog and I'm going to do my shopping, so would you mind letting me do it on my own?
As he left his home, it was a Sunday morning for chores for Gary Lineker.
Is this the end of your presenting career, Mr. Lineker?
Who evaded questions about the stalemate in the row with the BBC.
Have you come to any sort of agreement with the BBC yet, Mr. Lineker?
Can't say anything at the moment, sorry.
His son George, though, did tweet. Proud of the old man after a busy few days, he said. Shouldn't need to apologise for being a good person and standing by his word. The reaction of the public has been overwhelming. Thanks for the support. Support that saw a second day of disruption to the BBC sports schedules. Today hitting its coverage of the Women's Super League match, with no presenters and no pundits after they refused to appear in solidarity. Also backing his friend John Barnes, Mr. Lineker's former England teammate.
Not long ago in the World Cup, Gary was encouraged to be completely partisan and not impartial at all in condemning Qatar from a political point of view. So I don't know from the BBC's impartiality point of view whether it's only we have to be impartial when we're talking about what happens in this country, but other countries we can be as critical as we like.
We're sorry that we're unable to show our normal match of the day, including commentary tonight.
The fallout from the row all too evident on air. Last night's Match of the Day condensed to a 20-minute scaled-back highlight show. Ratings were up by 500,000, perhaps out of curiosity. The Chancellor saying while he disagrees with Mr. Lineker's views on the government's asylum policy, it's a matter for him and the BBC.
Well, I don't agree with his comments.
So should he apologise then?
I personally think that he was wrong to say what he said. But if you believe in BBC independence, then it's not for the Chancellor or any other government minister to say how these issues are resolved.
Also weighing in, Labour's shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Tory MPs have put intolerable pressure on the BBC because they don't like the criticism of their government policy. And whether you agree with what the language Gary Lineker used or not, he should be able to express his views. And I would urge the BBC to rethink their decision and put Gary Lineker back on air.
But with tonight's Match of the Day 2 also due to air without presenters, the chaos for the BBC continues. Sejal Carrier, ITV News.
And the Prime Minister, who's flying to a summit in San Diego in California, spoke of his sadness about the Gary Lineker row. The big international issue he'll be focusing on, though, in the US will be plans to supply Australia with nuclear-powered submarines because of the threat from China. Our political editor, Robert Peston, is travelling with the Prime Minister and sent us this from Washington.
We've just touched down in Washington on the way to San Diego. In the Prime Minister's plane, and he's remarkably chipper. He came over and talked to us and said he's very sad about the mess that the BBC finds itself in following the suspension of Gary Lineker, but plainly not that sad. Now, the main focus for him for the next 24 hours is protecting the UK from external threats. Tomorrow, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, will stand up in the House of Commons and announce what's called a refresh of the integrated review. That is our policy to protect ourselves, or our policies to protect ourselves from the likes of Russia and China. And what I'm expecting to see is increased defence spending, particularly on stockpiles of weapons and indeed on our nuclear capability. But for the Prime Minister, it's all about a really important meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, and the US President, Joe Biden, in San Diego, where they will put the finishing touches on a plan to supply nuclear submarines to Australia and take a more general approach to seeing off what they see as the challenge from China. Rishi Sunak says he doesn't like talking about China purely as a threat, but he does recognise that both militarily and economically China does pose a challenge to our way of life.
Robert Peston there reporting from the US. On to other news now. There is a scramble tonight by some banks to come to the rescue of the British arm of the American Silicon Valley Bank, which collapsed on Friday. SVB, a lender to some of the biggest names in the tech world, has become the largest bank to fail since the 2008 financial crisis. There have been warnings British firms who use it could start to run into problems, such as not being able to pay their staff from tomorrow. The government and regulators are trying to find a buyer to step in before the morning, or SVB could be put into an insolvency process. There'll be help in the Chancellor's budget on Wednesday for families on universal credit who have to pay for childcare. They'll receive payments for fees they have to pay up front rather than in arrears. And junior doctors will go on strike tomorrow in England for 3 days. Nearly 40,000 of them in the British Medical Association are planning to walk out in a dispute over pay and conditions. NHS providers say it will be a very difficult day for the NHS. On to sport now, and another eventful day in the Rugby Six Nations, where Ireland have moved to within one victory of a clean sweep Grand Slam. The world's top-ranked team maintained their winning run this season, beating a rejuvenated Scotland 22 points to 7 at Murrayfield. Chris Scudder was watching.
The flower of Scotland back in bloom. They've been shouting from the rooftops that this was their best team of the 21st century. Defending was ferocious in a titanic tussle against the world #1 team, and the Scots struck first through Hugh Jones.
It's Jones again!
But this is an Ireland of rare vintage. They'd already beaten France, who demolished England yesterday, and Mac Hansen's try edged them in front.
Well, the covering tackle arrived, and he'll celebrate.
Then it was all about the strength of Ireland's squad. They lost players through injury, but struck twice more. First through James Lowe.
And James Lowe gets it down. Try Ireland!
Then, as Scotland desperately tried to stay with them, a third match-clinching try from Jack Conan.
And Conan for the line and the score!
4 wins from 4 for Ireland, 1 more against England, and the Grand Slam will be all green. Chris Scudder, ITV News.
In the Premier League, Arsenal have re-established their 5-point lead at the top. The Gunners made short work of Fulham at Craven Cottage this afternoon. They scored 3 times in the first half, including this one from captain Martin Odegaard in a 3-0 victory. They put some 5 points clear of second-placed Manchester City. And Newcastle's hopes of making the Champions League next season were lifted by a 2-1 victory over Wolves at St James's Park. Miguel Almiron scored the winning goal late in the game. The victory takes them above Liverpool into 5th place. And finally, from being a barista in Belfast to winning a BAFTA, could it next be an Oscar for actor James Martin? The 30-year-old stars in An Irish Goodbye, a short film about the reunion of two brothers, which has been nominated at this year's Academy Awards. So our arts editor Nina Nanar is in Los Angeles for the ceremony, which takes place later tonight, but sat down earlier with James to talk about his recent rise to fame.
How do you take your coffee?
I take my coffee without milk.
I'm having mid-morning coffee with Belfast's most famous barista, who's also creating a buzz around Hollywood for his other job.
I'm not going anywhere until Mum's done every single riff.
Set in a farm in rural Northern Ireland, An Irish Goodbye tells the story of two estranged brothers reunited by the death of their mother. James Martin, who stars alongside Seamus O'Hara, had already had some screen success.
It's just been fantastic. It's a nice moment, you know, it is, and you couldn't plan to go to LA, you know, really.
BAFTA, which James took back to his drama group, where he started, made up of people with learning difficulties. As an ambassador for MenCap, James says he's proud of the impact of his success.
I do have Down syndrome in real life, and it's just nice to play those characters, really. It's a really lovely story. I always say to people, never judge a book by its cover, because we're all human beings, we know how to act.
There are some changes to the show this year, amongst them the 8 craft categories that were controversially not shown during the live broadcast last year to save time, and now back in. And the Academy will be showing some of the acceptance speeches on social media in a bid to engage a younger audience. Fortunately for the Academy, nominees like Avatar: The Way of Water have made this the highest grossing Best Picture list in its history. And with record-breaking Asian representation at the awards, the hope is this year there will be plenty of positive headlines. Nina Nanar, ITV News at the Oscars.
It's going to be a very good night now. And that is all from us for this evening. So from me and all of the weekend team, good night.